organization. If you look around, you can see the symbols of the different faiths. We have 2 services on Sunday, and we are delighted to welcome this particular group. Robotics and humanity, we've talked about it for 2 different Wednesdays. I think that you'll find that this talk will bring the 2 together, robotics and humanity, more perhaps than the other 2 talks have. Particularly because there are kids involved. The kids are learning from the robots. They are learning about themselves. They're learning about communication and getting along with people. And there are wonderful success stories, which I'm sure you'll hear about kids from underprivileged areas who have been in this program, the FIRST program, and have gone on to make their lives meaningful and graduate from college. So I want to hand you over to Corey, who will make the introductions.
Thank you, Mary.
Corey from the museum.
Thank you. My name is Corey Rogers. I'm the curator designer at the Shelburne Museum, and I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of All Souls, Shelburne Farms, and Shelburne Museum for coming to our 3rd and final installment in our conversation series, Robotics and Humanity. General sponsor for this event, for this series, has been made by the Alma Gibbs Johnson Foundation, and the media sponsor is RETN. This series of discussions is a great prelude to what we have coming up at the museum this year. We have an exhibition that I've been working on along with my co-curator Sarah Curry called Time Machines, Robots, Rockets, and Steampunks. And really what we're looking at here is the role of, or the roles of imagination and play in science fiction subgenres like robotics, space exploration, and this kind of retro alternate reality of steampunk. And we hope that you'll come and visit us. That opens, I think, on June 14th. But it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Fran's daughter, the doyen of Vermont media. She has, for the last 25 years.
Oh, yeah.
25 years she's involved in the production of radio and television events, and she's also been very great in working with a lot of Vermont charities. And she's going to be interviewing John Abele, who, as many of you may know, was the founding chairman of Boston Scientific Corporation. John, I do not envy you. I was sitting in your place last week. It was pretty scary, but I'm sure you'll manage it well.
Thank you, Corey. Corey and Sarah did a great job actually punting. Aubrey Schick was to be here. She is a roboticist from Carnegie Mellon, and she was going to bring her robots, and she's quite a remarkable woman. And of course, her plane did not get, was late. She wouldn't have made the connection, so she couldn't get here until 7, which was a little late for this series. She will, however, the Shelburne Museum has arranged for her to come to town on August 24th as part of their Lunchbox series. So for those of you that were really like, oh, I came here for her, but you got Corey and Sarah. But you still want to meet with her, that'll be on August 24th, so that's terrific. You know, as I've been doing this series, it just seemed like such an odd thing at first, but the more you get into robots, the more you realize they are everywhere. They are all around us. We use them every day in our phones, the ATMs. I mean, there are more exotic ones, but the military, of course, is using them. They're used constantly in medicine, which, of course, John Abele knows a lot about. They really, and they embody our imagination, our ingenuity, our fear, and our hopes for the future. There really is a lot to this. So I am so pleased that we were able to get John Abele, who is familiar with this space, to be here today. You hold at least 24 patents, and I think Boston Scientific has tens of thousands probably. But he now, among many things, helps kids become better human beings through the creation and interaction of robots. And he also supports the unique intelligence that comes from collaboration on many levels, including at his state-of-the-art conference center just outside of Toronto. So I want to welcome John Abele. It's great to have you here. So just to seat your place in the world a little bit and go back, just to, where did your love of invention and science and technology originate? It started as a quite young man.
Probably as a family, I grew up before Little League, and that meant that you had to invent your own sports. And it always was strange to me to see that time period where kids began to be more and more organized. And there were some wonderful things about that, because they got to do things that we didn't do, but they also lost out in that inventing your games and coming up with interesting inventions. And I had I'm the youngest of three boys, and my oldest brother in particular was a classic inventor. And so that was it. And I spent a couple of years working part-time when I was in high school, actually starting at 14. You could get permission then. Helping, I started out in the stockroom, but I wanted to meet people and I wanted to hear their problems and see if I could solve them.
Because this was a hardware store.
It was a hardware store. Yes.
These are good problems to solve.
Oh, they're a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun. So that spurred
That really
it on.
kicked it off. So while a student at Amherst, where you have a double major in philosophy and physics, you wrote a thesis, I heard, on the development of drones or robotic soldiers, really. And their implications on culture and society. What was the kind of conclusion at that time?
That no matter what you do, there's always people behind the drones, and whether the drone is going to be a Watson type, if you think of IBM's so to speak, smart computer robot, or not. Last weekend, we had one of our first competitions in Boston, and somebody brought this most amazing robot that was about that tall, that could dance, and it literally danced, and it also talked. So one of the hot things in robots today is, how do you get a robot to talk with you? And I think during the first week's guest, they talked about the fact that people use robots as pets in some cases. Sort of,
and Siri, even on the new phones.
That's right.
Is used as a pet for some, I think.
Absolutely, it is. Oh, thank you.
Oh, it might be for this microphone here. That's your, so is it possible to turn that up, or are we going to? Thank you, Jackie. I usually ask that at the beginning.
Right.
So we'll see what we can do.
Apologies.
So we're going to get to FIRST in a minute,
yeah.
which is for inspiration and recognition of science and technology, which is a whole competition. John is on the board of directors, and it's a remarkable competition that involves thousands of young people across the country creating technology. It's awesome. So just to get back, so you conclude that somebody's behind, the people are behind the robot. Are we ahead or behind where you imagined a few decades ago? So when you wrote, you were interested in robots when you were in college. Is our technology in a place where you even imagined it would be, or what are the kind of the implications now? Do you have the same conclusions now as you had then?
Actually, I wrote this paper for a philosophy course, nothing to do with robotics. I was interested in what would happen. How do you solve war? My father was lost in the war.
Yeah.
And we were aware, would there be alternatives? And one of the conclusions was, would the losing party of a war that lost to their drones accept the fact that their drones didn't win? And that's, I suspect that might be a problem. That was one of the theses of this paper.
Wow. Isaac Asimov came up several times. Did he have an influence on you?
Isaac Asimov actually did have an influence on me. He wrote a book actually before the screenplay You think use this one would be worthwhile?
You know, up or down?
Take it up here. Okay.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah. Perfect.
Then you can.
Fair enough. Is
back.
that any better?
Ah, thank
Thank you.
you, Arthur.
It's always puzzling, though, when you're talking up here, you never know how far the voice carries. So
Right.
it is important to ask. Isaac Asimov developed a story that he called Fantastic Voyage. And it led to a movie in the early 60s, or mid-60s, I guess. And it was about shrinking doctors to go
Yeah.
inside the body of this patient who had cancer, and then fixing them.
Yeah,
And
they're in like a little submarine.
Yeah, the best part was
Inside the body, right.
Raquel Welch used a laser. That was really the great thing. But Asimov was actually quite a philosophical fellow, and he actually wrote a book called I, Robot, and a trilogy of stories in which he had robotic ethics and so forth. And I think
Right.
they talked about that in the first weekend too. And that was a particular interest. If you have all this technology, how are these decisions going to be made? And if, for example, I've got some pictures outside in the hall that show robotics being used in medicine, and you begin to ask, gee, they can not only fix things, they can sort of make things better. And I think of the students who are in the robotics competitions, and there are hundreds of thousands of them. They're going to be inventing these things, but hopefully they're going to think about the implications of, what happens if everybody uses this?
Right.
The golden rule as it applies to people and to robots.
Well, in speaking of that, you made your mark and your fortune being an out-of-the-box thinker and innovator, and surgeons were really threatened by the vascular stent and the balloon catheter, since their skills might not be so necessary in a certain way by those inventions. So you and your company not only kind of brought something new and had to change a whole culture and a way of thinking about the importance of less invasive surgery, but also what are the ethical implications of not only changing a culture, but surgery and medicine and bringing kind of this technology to it?
We had a sort of a basic principle, a company goal, if you will. We would develop technology that would lead to products that would lead to procedures that physicians would do that would reduce risk, trauma, cost, and time. And I figured, gee, if we do that, nobody could argue with that. Well, obviously, I was wrong, because it wasn't the idea that was resisted. It was who was presenting the idea. I did not have the credentials to be able to make good suggestions, and that's a royal I. That was a we, and so forth. And not only in our organization, but with others that were working at the time, and with scientists in various universities with whom we worked. And it was rather fascinating that the recognition of the siloization of literally just about everything. Certainly the academy, if you think of the specialties in every university, and the fact that in those specialties, they don't have a lot of diversity. By that, I mean you can't belong until you have earned your stripes, your credentials. So unless you have the right type of experience, you can't participate. And as a result, a lot of the thinking in all of these specialties, but particularly medicine, becomes very insular. And they have their heroes and so forth, but they don't definitely think outside the box.
Well, but you blew that open on some level. And so that culture has changed.
A little bit.
A little.
But the dilemma today is there is so much knowledge coming out. All these statistics that the amount of knowledge generated this year, the printed knowledge, will actually exceed that in the last 5,000 years. It's actually sort of a depressing thought. But it has resulted from a variety of reasons. First of all, is these tools for writing and inventing and thinking are available to a lot more people. Mm-hmm. And they enable you to do it faster. They enable you to connect with others to do it faster. But now you can specialize so that the silos have silos. And it really gets very, very complicated. And yet, if you talk to most university presidents, including the ones right here in Burlington and in Middlebury, they will tell you they really want their students to be Renaissance thinkers. They want real liberal arts education. And liberal arts includes science. Mm. And it's more difficult today than it was because there's a lot more out there. And at the same time, there's a lot more ways that people can learn out there.
Well, it's almost how you get the education and what you do with it than getting the information. We can all get the information now, right?
Yes, yes.
So,
you're right. And how do you put it together? And that's kind of the Renaissance thinking aspect of it. And it's something that we as a society do have a lot to worry about. Every individual today, or at least the average individual, let me rephrase that, the average individual, certainly in a westernized society, has more power than kings and potentates and CEOs and so forth of 25 years ago. That's the gift of Google, if you will. And it's not just being able to access that knowledge, and of course, not everything on Google is right, but hopefully that's why you go to school, is to learn to be an informed user of knowledge. But the fact that you can get so much information and you can connect with so many people, you can find answers. We're so spoiled now. That really says, if we can aim that power to help solve so many of the major problems we have as a society today, there's real excitement for it.
before we get on to your brilliant young people that you're working with F.I.R.S.T, when you were very young, when you were really 7, you contracted a very rare infection of the bone marrow, and you had a much closer relationship with medicine and hospitals than any boy should. How did that connection with medicine and a very difficult disease affect your life's work? I mean, clearly you went into medicine in a way, but from the back door. But
ironically, I got into medicine. I said I never wanted to go near a hospital again. Those are not the best places in the world. I spent a long time there, and the people were nice, but just a lot of bad things happened. And but I got involved in it because it was an area where there was a lot of innovation going on, and they have these wonderful gadgets and toys that are just so much fun to play with. And so I sort of fell back into it saying I never would.
From the gadgets. So, which takes us right to F.I.R.S.T in a way, and back to robots. So, and not only in it, there's a team from Essex High School, very exciting, that's been winning some of these, and will go on to a much bigger competition. So even right here, these things are happening. A piece of F.I.R.S.T that really speaks to another passion of yours, besides building and gadgets and robots and building better, and then it's groups of young people that do this, but it's collaboration. And we've kind of been hinting around it in a lot of ways. And it's not an innovative way for a businessman to think, which is another piece that I think is so interesting. It's not the typical competition model. Why is collaboration so important, and maybe more important today than ever?
Well, if you really want to get something done, you find you have to identify what the barriers are. And unfortunately, one of the big barriers is people who don't want you to do whatever it is you want to do. And therefore, it's very important to understand them, understand what their concerns are, understand what their desires are, and see if you can work something out. With F.I.R.S.T, part of the lesson in collaboration is the way the game is designed. It's actually a competition. You'd look at it from a distance and say, wow, they're excited, they're screaming, they're yelling, they're cheering their team. They're very disappointed if they don't do well. But the one thing you don't hear is booing. Why is that? It's how the game is designed. It's actually a co-opetition. You don't play one team against another. You play in an alliance of teams against another alliance of teams, usually 3 on a side. The game is different every year in order to make sure that those who played before don't have too much of an advantage, because we obviously want a real wide variety of people to participate. It has a lot of elements to it. There's a lot to the robot itself, so you have to design that. You're given the rules of the game and the goals of the game in the early January of every year. You have then 6 weeks, number one, to understand the rules and understand where the edges are. That's always very, very important. To design a robot that can accomplish the task that this game requires. To build it, to debug it, to build it again, to debug it again. And then, after 6 weeks or so, you start to compete with it. You don't play once, you play multiple times. The games are short. Both of those factors address the ADD nature of many of us today who are childlike. And your opponent in one match may in fact be your partner in the next. That means you don't want to destroy your partner. The first series of games, maybe 10 or so, are seeding rounds, the way we have in a lot of different sports. And then as they get into the final games, the people at the top of the pack in that seeding round get a chance to pick their partners who will stay with them for the final matches. But they have to pick them from the bottom half. And therefore, that motivates every team to want to know every other team. So unlike a lot of sports where your competition is the evil empire, your competition may in fact be your partner. So you want to do research on them. The more sophisticated teams will actually have a sales group that goes out and interviews everybody. And we have some all-girls teams. It really is fascinating. You see the psychology. They are so outgoing and they're so enthusiastic. And I obviously encourage all of you someday to visit one of these events. If you Google the word F.I.R.S.T, F-I-R-S-T, surprise, surprise, the first hit you get is our first. Now, I wonder why that is. You may know that the ranking system works on PageRank. Well, yes, this one did, but it actually was Larry Page rank, the CEO of Google. And it's all about you are what you celebrate. If you celebrate the right things, that's fun. But it means you got to know how to really celebrate. And that's something that the folks at F.I.R.S.T really know how to do. And there is a culture. There's a culture in this community. It's no booing. It's real respect for somebody who figures out some novel way of building their robot. They have tons of mentors. The mentors who come from industry, obviously there are teachers as well, but there aren't enough people out there to do that. So in many cases, they're students in colleges who mentor these teams. And now we've been around 20 years, so we've built up a reservoir of alumni who are all over the place. They tend to be doers. One of the things, you sort of say, well, we're spending a lot of money to make this happen. Is it worth it? Well, we've had some studies done, but I think one of the more interesting things is that we now have $15 million worth of scholarships just for having been on a FIRST team.
I'm wondering, however, with the whole STEM initiative, science, technology, engineering, math,
Right.
which we're trying to get into our schools, realizing we're behind, and how did that ever happen? And everybody's, but people have been pushing that for more than a decade. And although FIRST has been very successful, I'm not sure that that's true across the country. And why aren't we catching up, and why can't we make it as infectious as it seems that you've made FIRST?
First of all, that's quite correct. Creating the supply doesn't necessarily generate the demand. FIRST is all about motivation and making people want to know the technical subjects because that helps you win. And I almost have a little bit of trouble with STEM because it's STEM. It doesn't tend to integrate. And we have our specialties. Well, they're the people who work on the drive, and they're the people who work on the arm, and all that sort of stuff. But in fact, there's a lot more than just technology involved in the game. One of them is raising funds, and they actually learn how to raise funds. And there's an enormous network of FIRST people around, so they can learn from each other. And you're driven by the fact that FIRST is cool. Cool is a little bit different than fun. Cool means you're respected, and that's why people like.
And they love calling themselves nerds. They're proud, right?
Some do and some don't.
Well, okay.
and a lot of these people are a bit more all around than you think. We design an athletic component into the game, so we bring athletes into the game.
And given that, is collaboration characteristic of human nature, or is it dog-eat-dog competition, which we all think is much more in our nature?
It turns out that that's been a very hot subject in the academic world, and those people who study evolutionary biology have been arguing over this probably since Adam and Eve. And a book has just been written called The Super Collaborators by an evolutionary biologist at Harvard, in which he sort of claims, at least, that he's really found that out, and they are more likely to collaborate, as opposed to other species that don't, that the human beings are really designed to collaborate. Who knows, I guess, is a little bit of the question. But collaboration isn't a thing that happens. There are many forms of collaboration. There are adversarial forms of collaboration. You collaborate when you walk down the street and you don't bump into people. That's kind of intuitive collaboration. And then you have rules-based collaboration, like when you drive a car. We've got conditions for that, and you have to learn to do that. And then we have skills-based collaboration as you sort of move up the chain, and that would be obviously sports teams or symphony. And there are some of these that seem, at least, to be like what they call flock of birds behavior. Flock of birds behavior refers to leaderless collaboration, where the birds will, not every bird does it. People think of the ducks.
Different than sheep.
Yes, right. That is one of the negative things. But at the same time, our society is actually based upon that, and that it empowers a lot of people to do a lot, and the system doesn't work unless that happens. And if you think whether it's a business, or whether it's a not-for-profit, whether it's a town, have you ever thought about the fact if only the towns, just in Vermont, could collaborate with each other, how much money we'd save just by sharing? It's always amazed me that that doesn't happen. Not-for-profits don't collaborate very well. And how do you create a community and a culture that knows how to make that work?
There is resistance to collaboration.
There is, and I think it's different. I mean, certainly there's a greed resistance, which occurs in some businesses, but in the case of others, and I think probably more in the not-for-profit world, it's probably a matter of control. They want control, they've got their vision and their baby, and they want to do it.
Which takes me to another collaboration seems in just the last few years been moving towards crowdsourcing, which is a really new phenomenon given the internet.
Yes.
And how people can build on other people's ideas very, very quickly with open source, and it's truly amazing. What do you think are the implications for crowdsourcing and for all of us, and even right here in Vermont?
I happen to be a huge fan of it, recognizing at the same time there's a huge amount of risk associated with it.
Actually, does everyone know what I mean by crowdsourcing? Maybe I should, sorry.
Good.
Actually, why don't, John, do you want to define it since you're very involved?
First of all, there are several definitions of it, maybe quite a few. It's the concept of reaching out to a large number of people to solve a problem. An example might be Linux, which is a very popular software in which 50,000 people around the world helped create this software. There was a theoretical leader, but he had no power. It's just that he had the respect of everybody. Linus Torvald was his name, and that Linus is why it's called Linux. And yet there are tons of things like this that are taking place every day. There are organizations now. IBM each year has something they call an idea jam. And they have 100,000 people in IBM contribute to solutions. Now, IBM is trying to figure out crowdsourcing. It's not easy to get everybody to work right, and as always happens, there are some people who cheat. And how do you design a system that can really take advantage of that?
But there have been some amazing people will throw out a problem, and people from all over the world will send in solutions. And because you have that incredible diversity of ideas, sometimes that idea that you just didn't expect that works right has popped up that would not have happened without the internet. And
there's a book that sort of captures the essence of this, and it was called The Wisdom of Crowds. It was a bestseller written about 4 or 5 years ago by a gentleman named James Surowiecki. And he points out that the title of the book, The Wisdom of Crowds, is of course a play on words. There was a very famous book written in the early 1800s called The Madness of Crowds. And we tend to think that crowds are dumb, and probably most of the time they are. However, there are several things, attributes, if you will, that a wise crowd has. Number one, it's very diverse. And not just diverse in race, it's diverse in age, in culture, and experience. Number two, there's a mechanism for allowing everybody to contribute. Not just a mechanism, a mindset to have everybody contribute. And then there is another mechanism to aggregate all the data that those contributions bring. Now you think in the classic business suggestion box model. Everybody knew that that didn't work. The suggestion box ended up in that circular file next to the boss's desk. And in the case of crowdsourcing, that's not the case. And the concept is, in fact, to see this difference. And in fact, there are lots of variations on that. There's even an organization called InnoCentive that performs this crowdsourcing for people. There's something called the X-Prize. Have any of you heard about the X-Prize? X-Prize is a mechanism for putting grand challenges in front of people and then giving people a lot of money. The first group to privately launch a rocket into space with somebody in it and take people into space twice within 2 weeks or whatever I don't know what the exact timing was, won $10 million. Now, as it turned out, they spent $20 million doing it, but they did do it, and the value wasn't the money. There is an X Prize for the first car to have 100 miles per gallon.
And I think we can go on and on.
Yeah.
Actually, your very personal experience with this was your father went missing during World War II. He was the captain of a submarine. And it was only within the last few years that this mystery was solved, really through crowdsourcing, the determination of you and your brother, and serendipitous events. You were able to find the sub off the coast of Alaska and all the families and resolve something that had been something painful for decades.
We not only did that, and this is the royal we again. We were visible, but leadership happened all over the place. And it turns out that the valuable information that led us to clues that led us to finding more people came from Japan. Now, my father was World War II submarine commander. There were 70 people on that ship, and they were lost in the Aleutian Islands, actually closer to Russia than the United States. And it had been there for 62 years when we learned through the magic of the internet. Of course, every year the internet gets a little bit more powerful. And we actually watched it grow more powerful and watched it as it grew in Japan as well. And we connected with a person who had worked for the Japanese Navy, was very interested in it. This was his hobby of World War II history. He helped get some other people who went into the Japanese National Defense Archives, found misfiled records of a ship's log that had actually confronted with my father's submarine. And we then went and pulled together a team and went and found it. But in addition to that, in finding some of the relatives of the sailors on it, we came across 3 people who were genealogists. And they helped us find relatives for every single sailor on that ship. And if you see the trail of how they found these people, one of them who was born in the Philippines and hidden in the jungle because Japan occupied the Philippines. It's just an amazing story.
And then just coming back to even humanity, how the Japanese really wanted to honor your family and the family of all of those that were lost, and realizing that we are in a very different place right now.
It turns out the wife of the commander of one of the ships our dad sank was still alive, is still alive, 101 years old, has 3 children the same age as myself and my brothers.
It's very powerful. And technology, of course, it was a robot that went down and found the submarine
Right.
deep under the ocean. I want to make sure that I'm sure people have a lot of questions. I just quickly, Maker Faire and the Maker Movement is something that also is very new. It includes art and craft and technology, and because there is this open sourcing, and a thing that I'd never heard of until last week, an Arduino board that is kind of, people can make their own robots now. There's a do-it-yourself movement in technology, and what is the promise of Maker Faire and this whole movement? And I guess you just said you are going to be a part of one, or one is happening?
Yes, and we
soon
actually
here?
have the person who's leading it sitting in the back, Doug Webster. And this will be a first for Vermont, but in fact, it'll be an early example of how you get people together to do this activity. The concept of a Maker Faire is letting people do it themselves. It's the do-it-yourself movement as applies to building some complex things that may be artwork, that may be whatever they may be. The idea is to innovate, have fun, make beautiful things, make humorous things, and we're going to have one in end of September at Shelburne Farms in the Coach Barn, I think.
Well, even Robert Gerasi, who was here the first week, he was really into craft, and I thought how charming that he's into this kind of old-fashioned thing. And of course, what is old is new, again, in this wonderful integration.
The amount of innovation that is going on in all these fields, whether it's agriculture, whether it's education, it's really enormously exciting. And sharing across these specialties and fields is where the innovation comes from. You don't innovate within your silo, you innovate when you crash silos together. And there's so much opportunity to do that, and as it turns out, there are tons of makers who have done amazing things in their backyards in Vermont. And we just think it'd be fun to kind of celebrate that, and maybe have some people build some other stuff as well.
Great. Where is that going to be? Should we? Oh, in Shelburne Farms, of course. That's what you just said. And what day again? September 29th. Great. Awesome. I have a few more questions, but I really think it's time to see if you have some questions for John. We've covered a lot of different kind of bases. And I can continue on my own and have my wonderful conversation here, but I'm sure that some of you have a few questions. Yes?
I worry about what's called the singularity, if you'll define that first, and what you think that foretells or will bring us. Because it's a philosophical question as well as a technical question.
Well, that goes back to that study I did in philosophy in college.
Exactly, that's what it's
Yes, and there's probably a science fiction story a week written with that thesis is when do the robots take over?
Yeah, if I can just define, it was a question about the singularity. This was discussed in our first conversation. It's really an apocalyptic view of when robots can think for themselves, and will they take over, or will they make our lives wonderful? And there's kind of, both views are out there. Is that kind of, and where?
I think my interpretation of singularity is a little bit more, a little broader, and that is, it's the melding of technology and the human mind, if you will, so both of them work together in a single, as opposed to the robots taking over, the human and the robot work together. Like nanotechnology in medicine, where you inject some kind of little, whatever, an Asimov thing. It does its work, but it does the bidding of the human host.
We're all already part cyborg, and there you go, and that is a real question, and how much is enough, so to speak. In our medical world, I see things going on today in a lot of different specialties where you might ask that question. There are a number of people, I don't know if anybody in this audience has a cochlear implant. A cochlear implant is a device that allows people who are basically, totally deaf to hear. There's a new book out by a guy who has a cochlear implant and had written a book earlier called Rebuilt. And it was about his experience rediscovering his own hearing gradually learning to listen to speech, then separately learning to listen to music. And the computer in his brain, along with his brain, were getting to know each other. They were talking to each other, and then they would fine-tune it periodically with the engineers. And at one point, he was at an event where there was a lot of noise, and he heard a voice in the background that was not as loud as the noise that was out and around, but he could hear perfectly. And the person next to him could not. And the observation, of course, is now he has enhanced capabilities. He was truly bionic. And I think that's true. A lot of us, there is a magazine called the Journal of Bionic Engineering. A lot of international authors, I might add, particularly Chinese, makes you think. And how these things are going to be decided is going to be very, very interesting. The ethics committees in hospitals, and they pretty much all have them, aren't really equipped to address that type of issue. Just the very fact that we have been extending our lifespans by about 1 year every 5. Just since 1960, we've gone from an average lifespan of about 70 to about 84, 85. And it really makes you wonder what is next. And those born now have a pretty good shot at 100. Now, I don't know if you want to live to 100, by the way. And of course, what we were always focused on was not the length, it was the quality. And still are. And how computers are going to play a role both directly and indirectly. At some point, this may move inside. You know, I'm sure you've seen the cartoons with the USB slot just above the ear. And in fact, there are glasses you can get today that have a camera on them and facial recognition software that will tell you this is who it is. They have the heads-up display. You have to look through the heads-up display. And it will tell you who it is and who their children are and, you know, all of that sort of stuff.
That would be so convenient. Do you think our culture needs to change, to adapt to this future? Are there ways in which we as humanity needs to adapt? Or are we adapting?
As opposed to?
Good question.
Very clearly, absolutely, we do have to adapt. Now, we can nudge the ship, you know, slightly from time to time, one way or the other, but the die is cast, and the question that the scientists are often asked, and I think the most recent one, which sounded crazy to me, was the one where they were building the bird flu that is absolutely incurable. I don't know if you followed this, and so wait a second. This does not look like a good plan to me. If you haven't seen 2001: Space Odyssey, put that on the list. That is a classic, and the astronaut goes for an extra vehicular flight and wants to come back in, and the computer named Hal won't open the door. And Dave, the astronaut, says, "Hal, please let me in." "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that." And that's been sort of the classic question of when is the singularity, in a negative way, going to hurt us. But you're right, it is the integration of all this technology with the human that is going to be the thing that we're going to have to worry about.
Very interesting.
Actually, you're going to have to worry
Other.
about more than we have to worry about.
Other questions? Yes.
I just wanted to put in a plug for F.I.R.S.T Robotics. I'm a teacher at Essex High School, and our team is going to the national championships. But the more important thing is really about if you're interested in getting involved, it's a great way to help kids who normally might not have an outlet to really get involved and work together with each other, to really celebrate their ability to innovate. And that's really the key. In Massachusetts, there are approximately, as far as high school goes, I believe a little over 100 robotics teams in the state of Massachusetts. In Vermont, there are 6. So we have a ways to go here, and so I would just really encourage people to ask around your community and say, hey, is there a robotics program going on at our school? If not, is there a way to start one? And one of the things that, you don't have to be really technical to be really an important contributor or mentor to a team, because one thing that teams always need help with is they always need help with fundraising and community awareness. So, like I said, I would just encourage you to ask around your school, ask friends of yours, have you heard about, is robotics going on in our school, or how can we start to make this happen? And there are definitely resources available to help. So.
Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you. Yes.
It's very exciting. Yes, Jackie.
I just got an email from a friend who said that the favorite book in her teenage kids' family is Hunger Games, which sounds like the opposite of First Games. Would you want to comment on that?
I don't think they're the same at all. Yeah. Well, I haven't seen Hunger Games, but I've heard the thesis of how it works, and if we have too many people for too few resources, then there's going to be a culling, and the Hunger Game is about how that choice is made, where you go out and struggle to fight. Is that?
They're fighting for food. That's what I hear again.
It's not quite that way. It's more of symbolic fighting, like where there's a ruling culture and the peasantry or so. It's like a Roman gladiatorial. It's not really about hunger at all.
Oh yeah, no. But it is about who gets to stay and who doesn't. I mean that.
No, it's kind of, you know what it is? It's a modern version of the lottery, the Shirley Jackson story in a way, where a town picks a representative, and then there are 24, a boy and a girl from 12 regions, and the person who survives brings honor on their community. It's not quite what you're saying.
Okay. I think, back to the adaptation, how do we adapt to this? And that's where the collaboration, of course, is really essential. And how do you identify what the problems are? And how do you do sort of system thinking, not the silo thinking, that says, how do we make the whole thing work? And if we keep procreating at the same rate, and by the way, it's kind of interesting because the Western countries, the developed countries are sort of flat right now. So maybe it'll automatically stabilize, with the caveat that we're supposed to be 9 billion by 2050, and what is the optimum population of the world? What can it sustain, environmentally, ethically, and so. I mean, these are obviously complex things. Things that weren't that big not that long ago, 50 years ago. But we've grown at a faster rate. So these are things that those who are a bit younger are going to have to really figure out.
And some think that technology will make that all fine.
Absolutely. I think the whole question of food, that's a big question. Are we going to be able to grow it fast enough? And are the ways in which we grow it going to be environmentally acceptable? And are we not going to change the species dramatically in the process of doing that? So these are interesting
where do we
challenges.
stand ethically and morally around what we're creating? Ah, good. Yes, way in the back there.
I'm trying to think of how to express it in not too many words, but I'm always saying I love the internet, I love communications, I love computers. I wonder if I love something that's bad for me. And I think the F.I.R.S.T games are incredibly connective, and there's a lot of authentic relating going on and an authentic human activity going on. But what about the rest of us downstream who use the internet to make connections, who use those technologies but don't really understand them, and we get a feeling that we're reaching out, we're touching, whatever. Is that a plastic connection, more like a plastic food, or is it authentic? And how are we hurting our culture? Are we helping our culture? Or are we just evolving into something else? Because I'm biological, and that's technical. And we're talking about the interfaith. And is it authentic for me when I haven't invented the machine?
You know, there's something fascinating when you mention biological. We are biological, and there are tons of examples where there are species that have done well and then died out. Are we going to be one of them? If you think of the Earth as a biosphere, really almost as an organism with a collection of organisms that make it up, if it gets overpopulated, just like if we get an infection, we have a number of mechanisms we can use to try to treat that infection. White cells and things like that, and the Earth organism does as well. It's got pestilence, it's got air, it's got water, all of these little things that we're watching now with great concern. And if you think about the climate change problem and the loss of ice, it isn't a steady curve. It's a curve that suddenly changes. It gradually gets warmer, and then it gets warmer much faster, having to do with how, what do you call it, phase change. It takes a lot more energy to change the phase of a particular material from solid to liquid, ice to water, than it does just to raise its temperature by 1 degree. And understanding that, how do we prepare for it? How do we adapt for that?
Exponential. And
Yeah.
are we losing our authenticity? I also hear you saying as human beings. I see that we're starting to run out of time, but I'm open for 1 or 2 more questions. Is that okay? Back here, yes. Yes.
I have a gender question.
Uh-huh.
How do you think, as the collaboration grows, we could create more interest among girls? I mean, there seems to, they seem to be getting more interested, and they're definitely interested in using the technology. But in terms of the robotics, the designing and the building, how do you see that evolve and getting them more involved?
F.I.R.S.T tends to be, of the various activities in this area, a little bit ahead of the game. We're, for robots anyway, it's about 25% to 30% female. It oscillates, and it continues to grow. But it's regional that it grows, not national. And if you look at biomedical engineering, already it's 50%. And a lot you see in the medical world is that way. So I think there are subsets. However, with F.I.R.S.T, we recognize that this isn't just a natural thing. We create incentives, and we try to create groups to support themselves. So there is something called the Robotics. You may not like that name, but it is, they all know each other, and they do amazing things. And there's a reward in our system that goes beyond robots. The Chairman's Award is the most recognized and appreciated award, and therefore the most prestigious in the entire thing. And we have a Super Bowl, if you will, which this year is in St. Louis. And there'll be 50,000 kids and adults with kids there. And so it has the same atmosphere as a good sporting event would have. And that culture is amazing. And the chairman's award is not for building the best robot. It's for having the biggest impact on your community. Now, that sounds like a kind of a mushy sort of thing, but they have defined it. They've defined it in a way that says, we will do some internal stuff where we'll recruit other teams and mentor them. That's fabulous for the other team and fabulous for them. But then they'll go out and they'll do something. We had a team made up of students from 4 high schools, and it was in Appalachia. And they just went and they, got water, because running water was something that some of the families didn't have. They got it done. And it's a sense of, I can do it, that is celebrated a lot. And it means you've got to be a systems thinker, because you find that the resistance in many cases, the problem is not technical. The problem is political. And they learn to do that. The schools that accept these kids because they think they do well, they tell us, the admissions officers say, the result of this is we like these kids because they are both confident and humble. That wonderful, funky, odd combination that doesn't look like it ought to go together, but does. And the schools like to have people like that in their school. In other words, they're not just saying this person will do well. They're saying, we want this person in our community because that culture spreads and it's good for us as a school. So that culture changing is part of the whole process, and when it's done well, it's really great.
I think on that hopeful note, I'll let us conclude, because I'm sure John will be here. There are refreshments in the other room. This has been an incredible conversation. I have over today and over many these last 2 weeks. Your contribution, not only to F.I.R.S.T and our young people, but throughout your career has been astounding. Thank you very much. I'd also just quickly want to thank again the committee who pulled this stuff together. Mary Abele, Lisa Desmond, who keeps everything working here, Karen Peterson, the head of education at Shelburne Museum, Caitlin Ziegler, who did all the preliminary research and really kept things going, thanks to Shelburne Farms, and of course Shelburne Museum and All Souls. This has been a remarkable experience for me. I'm really heartened by who's come out to these too, that people really want to have a conversation that goes a little bit deeper than you necessarily get elsewhere. So I thank you for sitting for a long time and listening to these fascinating ideas. I hope that this will continue to generate some good conversations at home. Thank you all so much. Thank you, John.
Thank you.